Hello everyone, I'm Elizabeth Urcola. I'm the IFAS Pasco Extension Program Coordinator at the One Stop Shop. And today we are going to be discussing hygiene practices for farm workers, and our guest speaker is going to be Ms. Sherry Brezen. And we're going to be also discussing FDA Food Safety Modernization Act, which is FSMA. And our guest speaker today is going to be Mr. Francisco Rivera. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Sherry Brezen, and she'll take it from there.
Thank you, Elizabeth. My name is Sherry Brezen. Like she said, I'm the Family and Consumer Sciences Agent with Pasco County Extension. My program areas are within a whole realm of family and consumer sciences regarding money management, chronic disease management, health, nutrition, food entrepreneurship, and food safety. So we came together to discuss a little bit about what's going on with COVID and what farm workers are facing. So really the biggest concerns when it comes to fresh produce, and this was even way before the retail or consumer handling comes into play, are pathogens that you might find on the farm. All right, so our bacteria or viruses or parasites, these have always been threats, and they continue to be. Right? Nothing has changed with these. And then once a food has become contaminated with a pathogen, it is very hard to undo that. Therefore, prevention is key in keeping the produce on the farm safe. Now, the main viruses that we talk about with foodborne illnesses are hepatitis A and norovirus. And again, these threats are still there. In fact, hepatitis A has been really bad in the region of Hillsborough, Pasco, and Hernando counties. It's just not making the news as much because there's another virus out there dominating the news, but it's still there. And with our viruses, they need a host to multiply, right? So in our case, like a human host. And they are mostly transmitted via the fecal oral route. So that is when the food becomes contaminated, when an ill worker that's handling produce did not properly wash their hands after they used the restroom. So some fecal matter remained on their hands and then got onto the food, and then somebody ingests that. The problem with produce is that they are very low cook foods for many people, and there's no chance to kill off those organisms. Now, we're talking about needing the host to multiply. Don't confuse that with bacteria, of course. They need different conditions, different environmental conditions. With bacteria to thrive, they mostly need the right time, temperature, moisture levels, oxygen levels, etc. For a virus, we're just talking that it needs a host in order to thrive. So what about coronavirus? Well, it also needs a host to multiply. And they say it could possibly spread via the fecal oral route, and that's why we really want to be washing our hands. But really the number one way it spreads is through the respiratory droplets. And this is where wearing the mask comes in. Now, interestingly enough, it is just as contagious as norovirus, even though it's transmitted completely differently. So we've probably heard of cases of norovirus. We associate that with cruise ships. A cruise ship goes out, and then a few days later, we'll hear cases that 200 people got sick. So we're seeing that with coronavirus, it can spread that quickly. So it is just as contagious as norovirus. So a little bit of background about our coronavirus. It is a lipid enveloped virus. So that means that it's coated with a fatty-like substance. And the good thing about that is that this coating actually makes it easy to inactivate when using soaps, disinfectants, and sanitizers. So that's good news for us as consumers. Now, we also might hear on the news how the virus lives on surfaces anywhere from 1 to 3 days. We must remember, though, that these are research studies being done in labs, and with lab conditions comes controlled conditions. We're not necessarily going to see that as the case as consumers. It might live on surfaces, but not large enough particles or for that long of time. So cleaning and sanitizing on the farm. So you want to clean first and sanitize second. These are two different things, two different steps, and I think Francisco touches on that when he starts speaking. But just know that you want to do both steps. And really, with whatever your cleaning procedure is on your farm, just keep at it. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because we still want to be living, working within the correct standards for food safety. The only other thing, now you need to kick your cleaning up a notch and make sure you're cleaning and sanitizing all the high touch surfaces on your farm. So think about it, the vehicles, right? The steering wheel, the door handles, the stick shift, the gear shifter, all of that needs to be sanitized after being used. And preferably only one person from the farm should be in the car at a time. You should not have passengers. Carts, dolly carts, cooler handles, light switches, computer equipment, office equipment, all over the bathrooms, sorting table, the totes, all of that stuff that maybe you weren't cleaning and sanitizing as much or as frequently now need to be cleaned on a more regular basis during this time of COVID. Now, what about fomite transmission? So this is when an infected person's respiratory droplets land on a surface or object. So this would be indirect transmission. So maybe somebody's respiratory droplets land on a light switch, and then you touch that light switch, and then you rub your eye with your bare hand without washing it. That would be fomite transmission, but we're not seeing that as much with COVID. The person-to-person contact is the #1 way somebody becomes infected, that person-to-person transmission. There are no definitive links of a positive COVID case with fomite transmission. However, it is a little hard to differentiate simply because the people who work closely with contaminated surfaces are also more likely to work with someone that is sick. So maybe they are with a sick person and they touch the same light switch or door handle. Well, what got them sick? The coworker or the light switch? Most likely it was that direct transmission where the coworker gave it to somebody from person to person. Additionally, you need enough viral particles on the surface, and then you need to touch your face. So within this cycle, we have ways to control that. That's where the cleaning and sanitizing comes in. And again, we're washing our hands. Do not touch your face with your bare hands. So what should farm workers be wearing? Should they be wearing gloves? Well, this is optional at this point, but they should know proper glove use. So your team should be fully trained on how to use the gloves, how to wear the gloves, handling them. Of course, if they become soiled or torn, they need to be replaced. If you're switching out tasks, switch out your gloves. Always wash hands before putting on your gloves, and don't let the gloves create a false sense of security. And we talk about this all the time with food safety in the restaurant industry as well. So always have enough gloves on hand if you're going to be supplying these with your farm workers. And then what about the masks? They are recommended, but it's not required. A few things to take into consideration. For someone working outdoors, it might make them hot, sweaty, and uncomfortable. So that might mean they're adjusting it. And by adjusting it, they're touching their face. We don't want hands touching the face if at all possible. So in that case, it might be better off if they would not wear the mask. But of course, that would mean they want to physically distance from others that are working on the fields. Now, in a more compact space or dealing with customers, you would want to wear a mask. But out on the fields, it's again, not required, just urged and encouraged, but it does not have to be the case. It really just depends. So how do we put customers at ease? Again, there is no evidence of the virus infecting people by being on a food surface, a food packaging. Again, it's really person-to-person contact. So it doesn't mean that it could never occur. It's just very unlikely, not very heard of at all. So again, that #1 means of infection is that person-to-person contact, when a sick person's droplets get onto another person and then they enter their mouth, nose, or eyes. If anything, when at a grocery store, we're more likely to get sick by standing next to someone without a mask and they have it, than on an actual food packaging. So that's why we're always wearing our masks when we're out in public as consumers. So So some final thoughts. Again, there's no such thing as zero risk, and we know this even in the restaurant industry with food safety practices. The risk will always be there, but there are ways we can minimize that risk. And that's why we want to stay committed to our food safety practices and take food safety very seriously and make sure everyone on the farm is fully trained, because the cost of the negative attention, the reputation, that the media will portray and losing customers is never worth it. And then Francisco will dive more into this.
Hello, everybody. My name is Francisco Rivera. I am the small farm agent from Hillsborough County. And today I'm going to talk briefly about what is the Food Modernization Act and how this apply for the farmers and customers that are hearing us. So thank you for the invitation, Elizabeth. Thank you, Mrs. Cherry, to provide all that introduction about the things that we need to know about bacteria, disease, and other pathogens that can affect us in the farm and in other areas. Basically, the Food and Modernization Act, what it's trying to do is to prevent the risk or the probability that the food that the growers are producing being contaminated with any pathogen. So all the producers, including fruit and vegetables or any beef producer, animal producer, all are affected on this Food Safety and Modernization Act. So what we are trying to do is to provide different ideas or guidelines that the farmer has to follow in order to mitigate the, the contamination of their product in the farm. So there are 7 primary rules on the Food Safety and Modernization Act, and that include the preventive control of human food and animal food. And what that means is that it is required that food facility have safety plans um, and follow the good agricultural practices. When we talk about product safety, what we are doing is that we are providing science-based information. That is what we do here in Extension um, to help the farmer avoid the cross contamination or the contamination of the products in our farm or in the whole process of what we call the whole food system. So that includes grow your product, harvesting, packing, and just have your product in your area. When we talk about foreign suppliers verification program, what that means is that all the people that import their products from other countries need to follow the same guideline that we follow here in the United States. So when they put this product in our country or in our state, they have to follow the same requirement that our growers in Florida and in the other state follow. So that is something really important when we talk about foreign supplier program. Also, the Food Safety Modernization Act make what they call the third party certification. And what this does is that establish a program for certify that other people that are going to make any auditory and going to verify that the product that is coming to our state is safe for it. Other important rule is the safety transportation, and that's required that those entities that transport food follow the sanitary practices to ensure that the food is safe. The last important rule is the intentional adulteration required that domestic and foreign facilities address different vulnerable processes just to avoid that food can contaminate on the whole food system, and be sure that the food that you are eating and consuming in your home is free for any pathogen. So what this really is focused on is in the prevention of the food contamination in any of all these states that we are talking about. We have something that is called the Food Safety Alliance curriculum. So what that does is that provide the training and education to the farmers and the farm managers to avoid the contamination in your farm and follow all these food safety guidelines. So probably you are thinking what is the Food Safety Modernization Act, and basically what the FSMA does is that they create these safety rules, and this is like the first mandatory standards for the production of food and vegetable, um, for growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of fresh produce in the United States. So this is a rule that is made by the FDA, Food Drug Administration. And basically what this does is provide the different guidelines for the farmers and shows the farmer or tell the farmer to follow what we call the good agriculture practices in their farm. And something that is important about this is that you need to keep or keep your records, because at the end you can follow all the good agricultural practices, but if you don't show to these agencies that are going to do the audits to your farm, it's like you don't have it. So sometimes we think about the Food and Safety Modernization Act like something that for some people is not required, because some of the farmers are exempt for do the FSMA Act. Some buyers are going to request all this process and they want to know what you are doing in your farm in order to buy your product. So that's what is important, that you follow the FSMA or Food Safety Modernization Act. Also, there are some customers that are willing to know what they are eating. So that's why it's really important that all the farmers think about FSMA and follow all these guidelines. Because at the end, what the farmer is going to avoid is that if something happens in your farm, you can say, these are the process that I'm following, and I can be sure that the food that you are eating is safe. So that is the really the important, or the importance of the Food Safety Modernization Act. Other thing that apply for the Food Safety Modernization Act is that if you are going to sell your product farther than 265 miles from where you are, basically you need to follow all these guidelines of FSMA guidelines. So let's take a look on this graphic that I think that is really important. And what this graphic means is that most of the contamination or the outbreaks that happen in the United States.
This graphic shows the outbreaks associated with different products, and if you look in the right side, the green area shows that 25% of the contamination comes from sprout or leafy greens. When we talk about leafy greens, we talk about lettuce, basil, and other greens, leafy herbs that we use. So basically, most of the time we eat these herbs raw, and that is the purpose why this is the purpose why eating raw increase the risk of have pathogen in the food.
Others are tomatoes, watermelons, um, other herbs like basil and rosemary. So just keep in mind that all these guidelines are made for the food that we eat raw. But in the case of this food that we eat raw, the probability to have a pathogen is bigger if you compare with the food that you are cooking. So if you are thinking in sell this type of crops, you need to think about that you need to follow all these FSMA recommendation. There are different type of organisms that can provide you a disease, and something that is really common is Salmonella, E. coli, Shigella, Listeria. So there are some of the basic bacteria, and if you think about, we have outbreak here in the United States before, with avocados, and with lettuce that come from other countries. So basically, with all these things that we are going to talk, we are going to avoid the contamination in our farm and at the end in our table. So these are the different, they are different source of contamination, and you as a farmer have to think about all this. You as a farmer have to think about all these things that can spread different disease in your farm. For example, something common is the workers, but the visitor of the farm also can spread different disease in your farm or in your product, or people that comes to your farm without permit. So good hygiene practices are important in order to avoid the spread of different disease. Other thing that is common are animals around the farm. That's could be feather hogs, deers, birds. What really worry about the animals are the fish. Most of these fish, or when the animal eat the crop, that can be a point of infection or a point that can transmit different disease. Other thing that is really important are soil amendments. Sometimes people use compost, but that compost don't follow the guideline, or the different parameters for kill all the bacteria, the bad bacteria in that compost. That is something that you need to think. And what comes to my mind is the organic producers. Organic producers use probably more amendments than traditional producers. Other point of contamination is the water. If for example, if the animal put their fish in the water and you are using that water goes to the field, can be contaminated for that fish, for compost, for runoff from other places. So there are some tests that you can do just to know if your water is contaminated. So that is something that you need to keep in mind. Another thing that sometimes we don't think about is about the tools that we use for harvest. Our tractors, our wheels can keep some contaminated material. So it's important that you as a farmer make a plan for avoid all this type of contamination that you can have in your field. Now that we know what are the different things that can provide contamination in our farm, we have to think about what is our plan, what we are going to do in order to make an assessment of the risk that we have in our farm. And you as a farmer are the person who knows what is your operation, but in case that you need help, you can contact your extension agent in any of our 67 counties. Also, we have a specialist in food safety that can help you to make that assessment in your farm. When we think about risk, what we are meaning is that have a probability to contaminate. When we make the assessment, that is the first step, then we need to implement different practices, and we need to verify that practices, we are following that practices. In case that something wrong happen with the different procedures that we are making in our farm, we need to make a corrective action. So we have to follow or make something to fix the issue that we have in our farm. Something that is really important is that we need to keep record. That is the way that we are going to monitor. So that's what you should do in your farm, is what it is recommended. There are different good agricultural practices that you can follow, but you need to keep in mind that all these practices are not perfect. Like, for example, most of the people in my county, they grow strawberries, and the strawberries, for avoid the frost, what they use sprinkles. So that sprinkle can be a source of contamination, and that's why it's so important you can test that water. Other thing that is important for reduce or mitigate the risk, all your farmer have the specific, they have this training, they know why this is important and why they have to follow all these hygiene practices, water testing, verify that you don't have animals in the farm or feeds of animals. Basically, what FSMA require is that your manager in your field being trained by one of our experts in FSMA. But that manager should train the crowd or the other people that he have in charge. So basically, as a farmer, you need to verify your practices, identify what things are not working, what things you can improve, and start keeping record of about all these practices that you are doing in your farm. So, in order to monitor your practices, it's important that you can write what we call an SOP, that is a standard operation procedure. And this sounds like something fancy, but the real thing is that it's easy. It's just that you can write in a paper or your computer or any software that you like to use, what are the practices that you do when you are in the farm. For example, if I'm going to use the tractor, you should have a procedure for turn on the tractor, verify that all the oils are working, and you can add there, we call like checkpoints, verify the wheels that are clean. So there are kind of things that you can think about the process that you are doing in your farm. If you are using an implement, just be sure that when you finish using that implement, you are cleaning the implement. Before you use the implement, you clean it. Write in a paper that your manager and employees can see it, and the person that are going to make your audits in your farm can see. That sometimes are things that you already are doing, but maybe you don't put it in a document, in a paper, or in a system. So that's what is basically what is an standard operation procedure. Is just a process that you are doing, and you are writing the process step by step. After you have your standard operation procedures, then you need to verify that you are following, or your employees are following that procedures. For example, every day before turn on or start my tractor, I verify that my tractor is clean, that the wheels was washed the day before with water. So what we are trying to do is mitigate or transport some disease from one field to another field. When we go to the farm, we plant and we just walk around the farm and be sure that we don't have like any signal of animal walking around, or any feast of a deer right there in your farm. So if that happens, what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove that feast just to make a correction action. But if we don't monitor that action, we can correct that action.
So it's preventative, Francisco?
Yes, all this FSMA, what it's trying to do is that they are trying to avoid the contamination in your field. If you are going to bring, for example, if you are going to bring seeds, you need to know who is your seller, and you need to be sure that that seller is certifying your seed that is free of any pathogen.
So if I may chime in, so it's very similar to like when we buy prepackaged beans, right? You want to make sure that the beans don't have like rocks in them and all that stuff. You want to make sure that the bean seller or distributor that you're buying your beans from is reputable or certified.
Well, this is similar to a hazard analysis. Is something that you do in the kitchen and
Yes.
in the processing area. So what you are doing is just mitigate all the risk of contamination. For example, if somebody comes to your farm in their truck, you need to be sure that you have an area for that person, that supplier. For example, I just remember that I grew in a farm, and sometimes just people bring all the cars everywhere, so they don't have like an space that people can just park there and then walk through.
So
For
whatever's on the
example,
wheels gets spread to wherever else the wheels touch and like that, and it
and
just spreads contaminants.
it's not only the wheels. For example, the people when they are walking, they can have some dirt in their boots or feet. So it's this is like a
So how do you avoid
biosecurity
that?
practice. But for example, you need to clean, have an area that you can clean the boots just for avoid contaminate different areas in the field or
So
other
like
animals.
a boot cleaning spigot maybe, or something like that to hose down, water down the boots before you proceed further.
Yes, there are different alternatives. They have like I'm going to use this word because I don't know what is the name, but they have like a boot cover that you can use.
Okay,
I
sure.
call like boot glove is how I call.
I like it. Yeah.
So
I was gonna think of like a one of those shower caps that you could put a shower cap over your shoe. I do that with my gym bag. I put a shower cap over my sneakers so that the sneaker bottom doesn't, the shoe sole doesn't spread germs inside
but
the football.
the point here is that need to be graded. If
Sure.
you do it but you don't explain in your SOPs, like you don't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
can do it always, but you don't have the evidence of what you are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what is it's really important. Corrective action, if something is not going well, if the water tests that have E. coli, you need to just put it in your papers, and then what you are going to do? You are going to test maybe the tomatoes or the lettuce, or verify what you are going to do to avoid. Maybe you are going to use other water resource. If the farmer is not cleaning their hands, what you are going to do? So maybe the corrective action is provide a training to all the workers to tell them why cleaning their hands or why sanitizing the tools that they are using is important. And as we said before, record keeping, that we have different tools that the farmer can use and included in different software or in their notebooks or computer programs that they use. And for example, when I'm going to apply herbicide, right, or fertilizer, I should have a document that I can put the date, who was the person who applied the fertilizer, be sure that the person is certified and know how to handle that type of fertilizer or herbicide. They are a specific cloth that they have to use. So the farmer responsibilities make a checklist that the person can mark. Okay, he's using the right best. They write the date that they are applying that. If an spill happen or in the farm, he have to record that,
Mm-hmm.
and they need to have a corrective action for that, because too much nutrients can contaminate the water bodies. The same happens with too much herbicide. So if that is spreading your farm, you should have a corrective action, know who you should call in case of something happens. If you don't keep the record of that, you are not in compliance with these FSMA rules. So basically, when you put all that together, all that SOPs, all that procedures that you follow in your farm, and keep the record and monitor, that is what is we call the food safety plan. So it's have all that things that you do in your farm and all the corrective actions that you do if something happened. All that together is what we call the food safety plan. The Food Safety and Modernization Act, what does is to mitigate the risk of a spread disease in the end user of these different vegetables and fruit that we are eating in our table. That's why it's really important. So we are trying to avoid the spread of all the different microorganisms that we talk today.
Mm-hmm.
And Food Safety Modernization Act is something that the farmers need to follow in order to provide that feeling to the customer what that they are eating is safe and they are not going to contaminate with any pathogen. It's important to the farmer that think in all that inputs that they are using in their farm, what are the practices that they are doing for cultivate their crops, growing their crops, harvesting and transporting that crop to the next person in the food chain. That can be the broker or could be the restaurant or directly to the customer. So that is basically what is the Food Safety and Modernization Act.
All right, thank you, Francisco. Greatly appreciated and wonderful information. Thank you and great tips. So, folks, if you have any questions, these are the contact information over here for Mr. Francisco Rivera and for Ms. Sherry Brezen. And as a matter of fact, I do have a couple questions that I'd like to ask. So let's see. I'm just going to ask a couple questions and then you all chime in accordingly. So let's ask the first question here. So do all buyers require third-party audit?
No, not all of them require the third-party audits. For example, we mentioned that people that make less than $500,000 yearly are exempt for these audits, but this is what happened and it's what the people need to think about. If an outbreak happened and you sell that product to your buyer and that buyer sell to the grocery store or food store, is going to ask you for these credentials. So that's why it's really important, because you need to show them that you are free of any disease in your farm.
Thank you. And here's another question. So if a farm worker doesn't have access to a sink with soap while in the field or on the field, is hand sanitizer okay?
Yes, thanks. So hand sanitizer is not meant to replace hand washing. It's okay to use in addition to, but not to replace. So the farm would need to be responsible for keeping the bathroom facilities fully and appropriately stocked. So they would not want to fall into that habit of just figuring, oh, I'll just use hand sanitizer. They would definitely need to thoroughly wash their hands with soap for 20 seconds and then properly rinsing the hands, discarding the paper towel, etc. And that's simply because the soap is going to get off all the dirt and grime, grease, etc., anything that could be on the hands. That's sanitizer is not going to do that. It will still leave the dirt on the hands. In fact, just kind of smear it around upon use. So it's best to just stick with soap and water and washing hands.
And washing hands. Thank you so much. And so here's another question. So if I pass an audit, and this one might be another one for maybe Francisco. If I pass an audit, does it mean my produce is 100% microbiologically safe?
Well, what we are trying with the FSMA is to mitigate or reduce the contamination. So we can pass the auditory, but during the food system or the food channel the product can contaminate. So what the farmer is doing here is to try to follow all the best management practices in agriculture that tell to the producer that that product is going to be safe. So
Thank
we
you.
can keep monitoring, but things could happen anyway. You are
Sure.
trying to follow the best way to avoid the contamination, but the risks stay there.
So the risks remain, but you can kind of decrease the risk, not really eliminate them.
Exactly.
So thank you. And so will there be farm inspections as part of the FSMA produce safety rule, especially inspections, farm inspections? I think that would be probably one for Francisco. It's will there be farm inspections as part of the FSMA produce safety rule?
Yes, definitely something happened is what we said before.
Mm-hmm.
Something happened, the Food and Drug Administration is going to stop in your field and is going to ask you for the procedures that you are following.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I always believe is it's better have something and don't need it than need it and don't have it.
That's a good point. Thank you. And last question I've got is, what should growers do right now? So how do growers get started and learn more about produce safety and third-party audits? You know, we times are uncertain right now, as far as COVID and diseases and contamination and all that. Third-party audits are an added thing to worry about. So what should growers do right now? So how do growers, get started and learn more about the produce safety and the third-party audits?
Elizabeth, we have extension office in every county.
Yes.
If the producer have any question, they can contact our extension office and then we can refer to the training that they need in order to be in compliance with the Food
Requirements.
Safety and Modernization Act rule.
Mhm. And with the requirements. Yeah, and so if anybody wants to reach out to any extension office, we could definitely redirect you and point you in the right direction and get you in contact with the appropriate person for your county. Like Francisco said, we do have an extension office in each one of our 67 counties in the state of Florida through the University of Florida Institute for Food and Agricultural Sciences, which is UFIFAS. So Francisco and Sherry, do you all have any additional comments or anything that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I would say just keep doing what you're doing as far as keeping your farm safe, practicing the food safety, making sure everyone is fully trained and aware. If you're going to use gloves, masks, just know proper protocol for using that, because obviously COVID, while it's not a foodborne illness, it is still going to be just another part of the new normal of what we're dealing with in the food industry.
Thank you so much. All right, and so thank you all so very much for joining us, and please feel welcome to contact us at the contact information provided above. Once again, I'm Elizabeth Urcola, and I'm the program coordinator for the UFIFAS Pasco Extension Office in Pasco County, the one-stop shop facility out in Dade City, Florida. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us The contact information is listed on the screen for Ms. Sherry Brezen and for Mr. Francisco Rivera, and they're both with the Extension office through the University of Florida, IFAS. All right, well, have a wonderful day. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Miss Sherry.
Yes, sir. Thank you both very, very much.